The future belongs to those who prepare for it today. These words by Malcolm X resonate through time, embodying the fierce determination and vision of one of the most influential figures in the fight for racial equality. Malcolm X didn't merely utter these words, he lived by them, inspiring countless others to take action and prepare for a future free from systemic oppression. His speeches and interviews have sparked revolutions, challenging societal norms and empowering the marginalized. If you doubt the power of his words, this transformative interview will make you reconsider. Chapter 1. The Origins of the Term Negro. Malcolm X began the interview by unpacking the historical significance and implications of the term Negro. He explained that this label was not chosen by black people, but was imposed upon them by the slaveholders and colonizers who sought to strip them of their original identity. The term Negro is a direct byproduct of slavery, he stated, pointing out that it is exclusively applied to the descendants of African slaves in America. Malcolm stressed that this term is rarely, if ever, used to refer to black people in Africa or other parts of the world, underscoring its role in the dehumanization and cultural erasure that accompanied slavery. He criticized the continued use of the word, arguing that it perpetuates a legacy of subjugation and strips black people of their dignity. To call ourselves by this name is to accept the narrative of those who enslaved us, he declared, emphasizing that embracing such labels diminishes self-respect and reinforces the psychological chains of oppression. Malcolm urged black people to reject this imposed identity and reclaim the names and identities that were stolen from them during slavery. For him, the rejection of the term Negro was not just a matter of semantics, but a powerful act of resistance and self-definition. He believed that this change in language could lead to a broader cultural awakening, empowering black people to reconnect with their heritage and assert their humanity. Chapter 2. Victim Blaming and the Right to Self-Defense. In a fiery critique of societal hypocrisy, Malcolm X turned his attention to the pervasive victim blaming that black people faced. He condemned the double standards of a society that permits violence against black communities but vilifies them when they defend themselves. We live in a society where the victim is painted as the criminal and the criminal walks free, he said. Malcolm explained that black people had every right to defend themselves against physical violence, just as any other community would. He rejected the expectation that they should endure oppression passively, calling such a notion absurd and unjust. Malcolm exposed the hypocrisy of a system that glorifies self-defense in other contexts, but demonizes it when practiced by black people. If a man puts his hands on you, you send him to the cemetery, he stated unapologetically, framing self-defense as a fundamental human right. He argued that the media played a significant role in this narrative, portraying black resistance as aggression while excusing the violence of the oppressors. Malcolm passionately advocated for black communities to stand up against injustice, asserting that passivity only emboldened the oppressors. He also pointed out that this societal expectation of nonviolence from black people was rooted in racism and fear. The dominant culture, he argued, wanted to keep black communities docile and submissive to maintain their control. By asserting their right to self-defense, Malcolm believed that black people could break this cycle of victimization and claim their power. Chapter 3. The Role of the Nation of Islam in Promoting Nonviolence. Malcolm X also delved into the philosophy of the Nation of Islam, emphasizing its stance on nonviolence. He clarified that the group's teachings did not advocate for aggression, but instead called for self-defense when attacked. We believe in obeying the law, but we also believe in defending ourselves if necessary, he said, highlighting the balance between nonviolence and the right to self-preservation. This distinction was critical, as it challenged the widespread perception that the Nation of Islam was a violent organization. Malcolm again criticized the media for perpetuating this false narrative, accusing them of equating the Muslim faith with violence. He pointed out that such misrepresentation was part of a larger agenda to discredit movements that sought to empower black people. When a black man speaks out against injustice, he is labeled a radical, a threat, or a terrorist, Malcolm remarked, drawing attention to the systemic bias in how black leaders were portrayed. He also addressed the societal reaction to the Nation of Islam's philosophy, noting that their calls for self-reliance and empowerment were met with hostility by those who benefited from the status quo. Despite this, Malcolm reaffirmed the group's commitment to nonviolence as a principle, while asserting that no community should be expected to endure attacks without defending itself. He called for a deeper understanding of the Nation of Islam's teachings, urging people to look beyond the distorted narratives presented by the media. Chapter 4: Civil Rights Laws and Their Ineffectiveness. Malcolm X was deeply critical of the existing civil rights laws, arguing that they failed to bring about meaningful change for Black Americans. He explained that while these laws were often celebrated as victories, they were little more than symbolic gestures that did not address the root causes of systemic oppression. A law on paper means nothing if it is not enforced, he said. Highlighting the gap between legislation and its implementation, he accused lawmakers of using civil rights laws as a way to pacify Black communities without actually dismantling the systems of inequality. Malcolm pointed out that many of these laws were deliberately vague or weak, making them easy to ignore or circumvent. The Constitution already guarantees equality, yet we are still fighting for basic rights. What good is another law if the ones we have are not respected? He questioned. Malcolm also criticized some civil rights movements for focusing too much on achieving symbolic victories, such as desegregating public spaces, while neglecting issues like economic inequality and police brutality. He argued that real progress required more than legal recognition. It demanded enforcement and accountability. Chapter 5: Reclaiming Identity Through Names. In one of the most personal and impactful parts of the interview, Malcolm X discussed the erasure of African names during slavery. He explained how enslaved people were stripped of their original names and given the names of their oppressors, a practice that symbolized the total domination of one group over another. When you carry the name of your oppressor, you carry the legacy of your oppression, he said, emphasizing the psychological impact of this forced renaming. Malcolm argued that reclaiming one's original name was an essential step in reclaiming one's identity and humanity. He shared how his own decision to replace his last name with X was a way of symbolizing the unknown name of his ancestors, whose identities had been erased by slavery. This act of renaming, Malcolm explained, was not just about personal identity, but also about collective empowerment. By rejecting the names of their oppressors, Black people could break free from the psychological chains of slavery and assert their independence. When we reclaim our names, we reclaim our story, he said, underscoring the transformative power of this act. Chapter 6: The Power of Unity Among Black People. Malcolm X passionately articulated the transformative potential of unity among Black people. When we come together as one, no force can divide or defeat us, he stated, emphasizing that collective action had the power to dismantle systemic barriers. Malcolm envisioned a society where Black people viewed harm to one individual as harm to the entire community. He argued that this unity must be built on a foundation of intellectual independence, where Black people reject narratives imposed by their oppressors and create their own frameworks of thought and action. As long as we rely on others to define our reality, we remain their slaves, he warned. Chapter 7: Global Implications of Black Unity and Africa's Role. Expanding his vision of unity beyond local borders, Malcolm X highlighted the global implications of Black solidarity. He argued that the liberation of Black people in America was intrinsically tied to the empowerment of African nations. When Africa is strong, Black people everywhere are strong, he declared, emphasizing the significance of Africa's collective voting power in global politics. He pointed out that African nations, when united, could wield immense influence on the international stage, challenging the dominance of Western powers and advocating for the rights of oppressed people worldwide. Malcolm described this unity as a revolutionary force, capable of reshaping not only the political landscape, but also cultural and economic systems. Our revolution must be in thought, in culture, and in action, he urged, calling for a comprehensive transformation that would empower Black people globally. He criticized the divisions within the Black diaspora, arguing that these divisions only serve the interests of their oppressors. He also spoke of the potential for African nations to lead this movement, serving as an example of independence and resilience. Africa is the mother of civilization, and it must reclaim its place as a leader in the fight for justice, he said. underscoring the importance of looking to Africa as a source of inspiration and strength. For Malcolm, the unity of the Black diaspora and the rise of Africa were not just aspirations, but essential steps toward achieving true liberation on a global scale. Chapter 8. Rejecting dependence on white systems. Apart from this, in one of his most provocative arguments, Malcolm X critiqued the Black community's reliance on white systems and individuals to dismantle the structures of oppression. He described this dependence as both futile and counterproductive, asserting that true liberation could only be achieved through self-determination. "No one is going to free you but yourself," he stated bluntly, challenging the notion that oppressed people should wait for their oppressors to deliver justice. He urged Black people to build their systems of empowerment, from economic institutions to educational frameworks, that catered to their needs and aspirations. "We need to control our schools, our businesses, and our communities," he said, emphasizing the importance of self-sufficiency in breaking free from the constraints of white-dominated systems. Malcolm warned that relying on external saviors would only prolong the struggle for liberation, as those in power had little incentive to dismantle the structures that benefited them. Malcolm also critiqued the idea of assimilation into white society as a solution to oppression, arguing that it often meant conforming to the values and expectations of the oppressors. "Assimilation is not freedom, it is surrender," he declared, calling for a rejection of this approach in favor of creating independent systems that reflected the values and aspirations of the Black community. For Malcolm, the path to true liberation lay in self-sufficiency, self-respect, and a commitment to building a future free from the constraints of white-dominated systems. Years later, Malcolm's vision has shaped much of the world we see today. His powerful words on victimization, education, economic independence, integration, self-defense, and global unity remain deeply impactful, guiding countless movements toward progress. Once again, as he said, "The future belongs to those who prepare for it today," and he was right. Now it's up to us to carry his legacy forward.